Alrighty, so welcome friends. Appreciate you all so much for joining us. I'm super excited to be here with the Dr. Sherine Powerful. Um, um, uh, Dr. Powerful and I met last year in a course called Emancipatory Inquiry, and I was just so impressed with their work. And so this is just an exciting experience for me, and then also hopefully for you all to get to hear a little bit about the research and just intersectionality, cultural identity, health, pleasure, joy, and so much more. So welcome to Carnival in the Caribbean, healing, joy, pleasure, and so much more. This is an event that's put on by the GSAS Student Center, specifically the Intellectual and Cultural Fellows, the Latinx Student Association, the David Rockefeller Center for Latin American Studies, the Harvard Gender and Sexuality Caucus, and a few other supporters. So thank you so much to those people for helping make this possible. We are filming this, so it'll be available for if you'd like to share it with some friends after the fact. We'll send you the YouTube link and you could watch it again or share it widely. That is definitely up to you. Right now, it'll only have me and myself and Sherine on camera. But if you would like to ask a question, feel free to add it to the chat, and we'd be happy to, ask your question or answer your question for you. Now, the way it's going to work is Dr. Powerful is going to talk a little bit about the research, and then we're going to get engaged in a little bit of a conversation about some of this research, about about Carnival in the Caribbean, and then we'll also spend some time answering some questions you might have. And my favorite part is introducing the Dr. Powerful. So Sherine Powerful is a Doctor of Public Health candidate, but like basically already the Doctor of Public Health at the Harvard T.H. Chan School of Public Health. As a Black Caribbean feminist, she is committed to celebrating and furthering pleasure, healing, and liberation for Black, Brown, and Indigenous peoples and persons of diverse agenders and asexualities, particularly those from the Caribbean. In this current critical juncture, her lived experiences are moving her towards the creation and curation of a life in which pleasure is greater than productivity. Her research interests additionally include feminist global health and development, gender and sexual health, equity and justice, and resilience and anti-colonial sustainable development in the context of climate change. If you can catch her, you'll probably find her obsessing over the color turquoise, gorging on chocolate-covered pineapples, or teaching herself experience designed to boost her event planning prowess. Again, she's just the most wonderful human in the world. I'm so excited to get to know Sherine, and I'm excited for this event. So thank you for having us, Sherine.
Thank you for having me, Michael, and hello, welcome everyone. I am really excited to speak with you all today, especially as I was telling Michael a little bit before we started that this project that I did was very expansive. I had a lot of data and a lot of topics, and I didn't get to focus too much on what I'm going to focus on today. So I'm really excited to speak with you all. And just a content note, this presentation does mention harm and violence enacted by colonizers against African Indigenous peoples. So please do what you can for yourself during and after the presentation. All right, and so I'd like to start with thinking about my own positionality as a student, as a researcher who has done this doctoral project in a settler colonial context. And so I want to acknowledge the Indigenous keepers of the land that we inhabit. And so first in the Caribbean, and I'm currently located in Jamaica. I'm Jamaican, I was born here, my family is here, and I want to be able to center and honor the original keepers of the lands that are of the ancestors who this project centers. And some of these include the Yamaye or the Yamayeka, the Taino, the Kalinago, the Carib, the Lucayo, and the Warao people, among others. I also want to give a special acknowledgement to the indigenous peoples of Western Africa who were stolen and enslaved, who died, who rebelled, who became the Maroon people, who persisted. Let's also acknowledge the Wampanoag, the Mashpee Wampanoag, the indigenous peoples on whose land Harvard University is located, as well as the Ohlone people on whose land the Zoom headquarters, and Zoom is the platform on which we're all congregated, where the Zoom headquarters is located in what is now or temporarily known as San Jose, California. And so we know that indigenous peoples are not people of the past, they're here with us now. And if there are indigenous people on this call, you're invited to share your tribe or your nation in the chat box so that we may recognize you. And I'll leave a few moments for that. All right. And so many indigenous peoples have rightfully critiqued the performativeness of land acknowledgements because they're often made with little to no accountability. They've called for acknowledgements to be backed up with actions, the primary ones being giving the land back and paying land taxes, for example. And so in the chat, I'm placing a list of actions that I put together, and I'm asking you all as attendees of this presentation to please commit to at least one of them. And this is to honor indigenous peoples and their continued fight for sovereignty, and especially for myself as a Black Caribbean person, understanding and uplifting the fact that there is no Black liberation, there's no liberation of any peoples without indigenous sovereignty. And so I lift up their existence and their resistance and know that our shared histories guides my public health focus on pleasure, healing, and liberation. All right. And so the photos that are appearing are from a carnival band called Lost Tribe, which I participated with last year, February 2020, in Trinidad and Tobago. And so I include these photos to add faces, to humanize this project, and to demonstrate my personal connection, as you will see me and some of my friends represented. And so getting into some of the history of Carnival, from the very beginning of the development of Caribbean societies as syncretism between European, African, Asian, and indigenous peoples, held for those who had been kidnapped, displaced, and violated through enslavement, indentureship, and genocide, have been conceptualized as freedom from enslavement and oppression. And so if we go back almost 3 centuries ago, Caribbean Carnival has its origins in what is now known as Trinidad and Tobago, where European colonizers brought their masquerade to the region, kind of changed it up a little bit, but dressed up as enslaved Africans to mock them. And before emancipation, enslaved Africans formed their own groups to parody the colonizers' mockery of them and the exclusion of them, and then they incorporated their own African traditions. After emancipation in 1835, African descendant people continued these practices as performance and actual resistance to the oppression they faced. And then there were some changing ethnic and class divisions in carnival participation that led them to having to readapt their practices in order to recharacterize their freedom and establish their own social spaces. And carnival spread around the region, becoming a fully fledged emancipatory practice grounded in cultural resilience, adaptation, and creativity. And beyond Trinidad, enslaved Black Africans and their emancipated descendants lived out their carnival cultural practices in places currently known as Jamaica, Barbados, Haiti, Bahamas, Dominica, which is different from the Dominican Republic, St. Kitts and Nevis, Cuba, Bermuda, Grenada, and on, among other lands around the region. And ever since the independence movements in the 1960s and 1970s, Carnival has evolved from a cultural institution into a national product as a part of the tourism industry. And so over time, with this evolution came barriers to participation on the basis of ability or willingness to pay, on socioeconomic status. So now Carnival's kind of become more of a luxury, whereas in recent history, a wider variety of people used to be able to participate. And so thinking about traditional and gendered carnival performances and how Carnival has changed over time. So carnivals have been inclusive, they have inclusivity at their core, but they have always tended to be very gendered spaces, and they produce and occupy very gendered spaces, which seemingly goes against their original origins as being very inclusive. And a lot of this is due to the cis heteropatriarchal nature of societies that have been colonized by Europeans. And in these contexts, men performed characters that symbolize the fight for resistance, the fight for freedom, while women were relegated to the sidelines and expected to uphold acceptable societal values by staying out of the mass, which is short for masquerade. And so for a lot of women, being marginalized from the main costume celebrations, they participated in Carnival's early morning celebrations, which is known as Juve or Dirty Mass, in which people put mud and paint and oil and powder and water all over themselves, which also allows for anonymity and represents the important role that women played in Carnival in those days. And so in addition to the fighter and the freedom characters that men often took on, they also dressed in pretty costumes or put on dresses to perform feminine characters, such as Dame Lorraine, who you see here, or Mother Sally, which is a character of the Crop Over Festival in Barbados. And they often had like exaggerating padding of the chest and the butt areas. And so these gendered performances, rather than being like a progressive transcendence of colonizer imposed gender norms, they actually hinged on a mockery of lower or working class Afro-Caribbean femininity, sexuality, and womanhood, as well as kind of like a buttressing of cis heteropatriarchal masculinity. And so I introduced these different Carnival characters, and you'll note that these are like snapshots of this coloring book called Mindful Masquerade. And if any of you were in my classes last year with Dr. Elamine or Gretchen Brion-Meisels, I'm sorry, I probably did not pronounce Gretchen's last name properly, but I had my coloring book with me and just showing you some representations of traditional Carnival characters. And so just quickly talking about how, yes, these are traditional Carnival characters and some of these gender performances have been contested. This contestation really started happening in the 1830s up until the mid-1900s, where we saw the rise of the Jamettes, which is a Trinidadian term for an economically deprived Afro-Trinidadian woman who rejected propriety. And so really speaking to this notion of sexuality and positive sexuality in carnivals in the Caribbean, Jamettes in Trinidad were really moving force to provide space for more open sexual expression and really subverting the control of their bodies that the different societal powers were trying to have over them, as well as subverting the colonial imposition that these Black bodies were grotesque. And so Gabrielle Hossein talks about Jamettes as blurring the lines between male and female, creating possibilities for alternate, unruly, and wild sexualities, which is another way to say sexualities that are not monogamous, marital, heterosexual, or otherwise sanctioned. And so today we have current representations of Carnival, as you saw in the previous slide, where women have really become the face of the institution. But they also embody political resistance and economic empowerment. There's space for the reclamation of sexual and bodily autonomy and liberation that is oppositional to respectability politics. All right. And thinking through some of these aspects around gender and sexuality, there has been some research, and you'll see in the interview excerpts that I'll include later, that even with all of these gender subversive performances, there hasn't really been an explicit reference to or documentation of queerness in Carnival or of people outside or beyond the Euro-American gender binary. But even so, Caribbean has tended to have an inherent queerness to it, which reflects how Carnival was queer long before queer theory or practice came about, especially because its societies did not fit the norms of European colonizers, and there was a lot of exploration and expression within the performances. All right. And so I wanted to introduce y'all to some of you may know, but some of the common elements of Caribbean carnivals. So we have the street parades, which many of you may be familiar with because that's the most visible element. The carnival bands, which provide the organization and the structure for Carnival. judging points where carnival bands get judged on their presentations, their costumes, their storytelling, soca calypso performances and competitions. And soca and calypso is music that originates from Trinidad, but we have a lot of different iterations around the Caribbean region. We have the steel pan bands and rhythm sections, and the steel pan is an instrument that was developed and created in Trinidad. We have cultural reenactments such as the Camboulé riots, which is around the burning of the cane fields and other historical representations from days before and after emancipation. Traditional characters, such as the ones you saw in my coloring book images. Juve or Dutty Mass, which again is the early morning celebrations with the paint, the oil, the powder. Music trucks, which is a big element since music is a driving force. You have the music and the drums and the beats driving people and providing that element of celebration. And the costume masqueraders also provide a big component to Carnival, as they're kind of like the center of the celebration these days. And then thinking about these elements of Carnival in the Caribbean, some of these are similar to carnivals that happen or take place in other regions. And I definitely want to highlight how Carnival in the Caribbean has evolved from being imported by European colonizers and then Africanized in a lot of different ways. And so you'll see that with other areas in the world that have similar histories, shared histories, especially those in Latin America and the Caribbean, that there are both similarities and differences between the different carnivals. And so, for example, carnivals in the Caribbean are thought to be much more participatory in nature, whereas carnivals in Brazil, for example, those tend to be affiliated with the samba schools, and really having this like year-long practice and performance and kind of like the expertise in it. And some of the costumes, some of the materials are different. And carnivals in places like Brazil tend to have these really huge, big float demonstrations, whereas carnivals in the Caribbean tend to focus more on the costumes, like the individual costumes, and we may have like the large costume presentations, but not necessarily the floats. And then you have the music that's different, so samba versus soca and calypso, for example. So there are some differences, but because of that shared history of being rooted in Blackness and the traditions of enslaved Africans, there are a lot of those commonalities as well. All right, so we've gone through the background. And for me, as both a public health practitioner and a carnivalist, I wanted to talk about how I came to do this project, or some of the intersections that I see very clearly. And so when people prepare for Carnival, there are elements of healthful eating, physical activity, and disease prevention. That comes up a lot in the campaigns by the different ministries of health. There's also a lot of activism that happens in Carnival spaces, particularly around agender and asexuality-based violence prevention. Some folks have written about how Carnival provides psychological release and reclamation of empowerment, how Carnival can serve as creative arts therapy to heal from trauma, and how Carnival helps to heal sexual violence and help to achieve sexual wellness for a lot of people. And so the biggest takeaway from these connections and these intersections is that Carnival is a strong cultural force that creates spaces for the desire and the improvement of the desire and the achievement of improved health. And so I see Carnival as not only just a cultural asset, but a cultural health asset that helps Caribbean people move from only surviving to get to flourishing. All right, and then contextualizing this in COVID-19 and how I came to be doing this project and what the different implications are. I'm sure over the past year, you all have seen or heard how there's also this increasing mental health crisis happening because of the pandemic and because of the repercussions. We're feeling less socially connected, and how that's just really affecting everyone, and how we have to navigate, how we have to mitigate the effects. And as you see, some of these articles are from the Caribbean, and they talk about investing in mental health and the impact it's having here. And so this has been at the forefront, along with the fact that COVID-19 cases have been increasing. And then this year, 2 months ago, right around when we were supposed to have Carnival in a lot of places in Latin America and the Caribbean, especially in Trinidad, this article came out around how if we needed Carnival in any year, it would especially be this year because of how Carnival provides mental health benefits for people. And so with that context, this is an overview of my actual doctoral research. And so I really use Carnival as a site of analysis to understand how the cultural practices that people are already employing can positively impact their health and well-being, to illuminate possibilities for improving access to this cultural practice in alignment with Caribbean communities' dreams of happier, healthier, and freer futures, as well as to develop a framework for a creative social entity. And I'm not gonna get into that, but just really trying to focus on centering pleasure, healing, liberation that can further individual and community flourishing. All right. So of course, when you do research, you have to do literature review. And I took a very transdisciplinary approach to my review, focusing on my topic of Carnival first and foremost, and seeing what fields aligned instead of first trying to fit my exploration into any specific discipline. And so you'll see that these are some of the main areas that I explored beyond reading articles about Carnival and its history and its meaning to people. And you'll see throughout that these threads kind of just build into my contextualization and conceptualization of Carnival as a cultural health asset, providing all these different benefits and experiences for folks. And I want to take a moment to highlight desire-based frameworks. I first learned about this in Dr. Elameen's Emancipatory Inquiry class, and that really shaped how I approach this project. And so I'm sure those of you who are at the Graduate School of Education may have been introduced to Dr. Eve Tuck's work. Dr. Eve Tuck is an Indigenous and Unanga scholar who wrote this letter to her community, really speaking to researchers coming in and doing damage-based research that only focuses on the negative things that are happening in their community to try to fix them. And so for me, it's important to highlight this, and this really guides how I did the project because I was able to hold complexity and nuance, hold people's lived experiences and stories about themselves, and really push against the negative interpretations of Carnival as that's just hedonism, they're just drinking and being lascivious, and this is just, a blight on society. Like there's so many of those external perceptions, but that wasn't centered at all, right? So I was really looking towards, asking masqueraders their feelings and their perceptions about health, well-being, pleasure, healing, liberation, inclusivity, equity, sustainability, all of that. So I wanted to offer that as you'll see some of these threads come through as well. All right, so I had 3 overarching research questions. How do Caribbean masqueraders perceive the positive health and well-being impacts of Carnival on themselves? How are Caribbean masqueraders experiencing Carnival as bringing them pleasure, healing, and liberation, which are connected to well-being? And how are Caribbean masqueraders reimagining how carnivals must equitably adapt to make them more inclusive, accessible, and sustainable? And so I do want to note that participants were able to define some of these terms for themselves. And I'm not going to get into all the results for all these questions. We're going to focus on very specific topics, but we can come back to it in the after I finish giving y'all the overview. All right, and then just a quick snapshot of my methods. This is a really big qualitative research project where I had a 2-pronged approach. So I did in-depth interviews and I did a document analysis, which was really a Twitter analysis. And in my interviews, I incorporated storytelling and photo elicitation where participants could bring photos to our Zoom interviews and tell me what those photos represented for them in relation to the topics. With the Twitter analysis and the Twitter posts, this was really about COVID-19 and its impact on folks' mental health as it pertains to Carnival. So today I'm going to focus on interviews and really some of the storytelling elements in the excerpts that I'll share with you. And then quick snapshot, interviews took between 1 to 2 hours. They were really great conversations that elicited rich perceptions. And I do want to note that for the entire project, because I had to really like select my population, that I limited it to people of English-speaking Caribbean heritage who have attended Caribbean carnivals in the English-speaking Caribbean countries and territories. And that was for like language considerations and just ease of access. And for the Twitter analysis, people were able to submit their posts. And again, it had to do with COVID-19, Carnival, and impact on their health. All right, so I had 18 overall themes, but here's a snapshot. Because remember, I had 3 research questions, was doing a lot, but I just felt like there was so much that I could explore, especially because this project came out of conversations with other people, other members of my Caribbean and my Carnival communities. And so this is a snapshot of the themes that I want to just show you all. And we're gonna focus on cultural identity, queerness, and health, which kind of thread throughout all of the themes. All right, so here we are at the excerpts component, and I'm going to read excerpts, and I'm going to ask you all to, listen, to sit with them. And of course, these are not in the participants' voices because it's my voice, but I really wanted you to look at, to read, and to hear their words in relation to the specific themes. And so I'm going to go over them, touch on them briefly, and we can come back to them in the discussion section. But I really just wanted to have this be a focus of like the storytelling component. So think of this as story time, and I'll try to do like voices to differentiate. I don't know how successful that would be, but here we go. All right. So in relation to cultural identity, here are some excerpts. Jamet shared, Carnival, first and foremost, is a space our ancestors created for resistance, for resilience, and rebellion. And for us, all of those were needed for us to heal. We had to find ways to resist what is telling us we are wrong, or that we are animals, or that our sexuality is animalistic in nature, that we are subhuman. We had to be resilient when we were abused and chained, sexually abused, etc. And it came a point in time when we said, well, enough is enough. We're not taking this sitting down. Carnival was created to have all of that as a part of healing. I feel like a lot of people nowadays are forgetting that Carnival was rooted in Black culture. I feel like Carnival goes against the odds of like, how do I explain it? It goes against anti-Blackness. That was by Marie. Kincaid shared, back in June, when some of the protests started happening because of the George Floyd case, I will never forget what she tweeted. Hey guys, remember when we said we didn't have Carnival in 2020? But look outside, mass is happening. And I said, you damn right. This is mass. This is mass in its purest sense because it's people fighting for liberation. This is mass, people fighting for liberation, fighting that oppression. Marie said, in relation to themes around queerness. And when I saw that, I was all like, Carnival is queer. But a lot of people have not adjusted to that thought process. But those are probably people who don't even study liberation. Let's be real. Carnival is kind of like, shade that too, because it just kind of shows that sexuality is more fluid. And then even too, when you study indigenous roots and stuff, sexuality was always fluid. It wasn't until colonization that it became non-fluid. Maggie said, pleasure for me in the context of Carnival is the elation that I feel, and I translate that through my movements and my attitude. Whether it's conscious or subconscious, I do specifically dance in ways that I think draws attention to me. It doesn't make a difference whether the attention is male or female because I'm bisexual. I do that and it makes me feel powerful. And having that kind of power does bring me a sense of pleasure. Cardi said, once I got on the truck, I realized that the majority of people there were LGBT people, and that also made me feel good. This truck was also part of my band, and I didn't even know. So, I mean, this carnival is just madness and pure vibes, and they're filling my cup with all kinds of mixed drinks, and greatness is going on. And I have never in life until that day seen in St. Lucia man whining up on man. I mean, we see woman whining up on woman all the time, but I had never been able to see it in public. I mean, I go to LGBT parties, so I've seen it there. This was in public. Panmehed said, on the one hand, it's very inclusive because I've seen and experienced playing with people from all across the gender and sexuality spectrum. But is it welcoming? That's the question. In some aspects, no. I guess it depends on who you're with, which band you're in, where you're going. You could feel safe, you can feel safe sometimes in some areas, in some bands with some people. But if you step out of that bubble, you're definitely at risk. Tigress said, there's not a system in place for the queer community to freely express themselves. And we don't express explicitly how we're going to keep them safe from people who don't mean them well. You have security. From my own experiences, security are not willing to intervene in any shit that's going down with masqueraders unless it's turning violent. And Jamet shared, I think that is still something that we need to, that we haven't worked on, that we have not completely accepted. And it's a reflection really of what's happening in our larger society. We have inherited that colonial view of dehumanizing non-heterosexual people, of not accepting bodies that are not obviously or strictly male or female. So we've got some work to do there. And it's part of general and overall anti-colonial and decolonial work when it comes to that. And around issues of health, which has to do with physical health, mental health, social health, spiritual health, many different dimensions of health. Robin shared, leading up to Carnival, I do make healthier choices, but I'm not sure if I'm making them because I want to look in my prime or as close to in my prime as possible, or if it's because I'm just not mentally, I'm excited. So I'm not eating junk food just to eat junk food. Pan Mehed said, just the fact that we have this season to let go, you have the whole year where you have all these stressful things happening and you have these things to focus on, school, job, children, whatever. I feel like there's this season that comes that gives you all these opportunities to just let it go and forget about it for however long. So you forget your problems for that night. You're playing mass on the road for 2 days. You forget your problems for those 2 days for sure. And the healing for me comes with that I'm letting go of my problems. And I'm using this time to not only just rock out and break away, but like for me. Jamet said, it is not a party. It is how we give ourselves that massive social self-care. A massive social self-care ritual every year. Because it has served us in the past in terms of a space for catharsis, a space for joy, a space for release, a space for healing. And particularly because we've been through a year that is traumatic, still traumatic, a year from which we're going to see a lot of mental and emotional health fallout. Brittany said, like physically, but it also really makes me feel happy and tired, I guess. Because once the adrenaline is gone, you'll be beat. Just want to go to sleep and rest for hours and days and whatever else, but definitely makes me feel like I can do anything and gives me, what's the word? Not motivation, but can't think of the word right now. But in short, it makes me feel like I can do anything that comes. Now I can conquer anything if you can sit there and pump for 12 hours. Kincaid said, I'm just wanting to take care of my body better, even more. Wanting to achieve very, very positive, very stable mental health moments, even in terms of distress. Being able to self-actualize, and especially being able to hit self-actualization as a Black person, it's a lot of times unheard of. And I definitely feel I hit that top of the pyramid during Carnival. So I would definitely say those are my immediate, health and wellness benefits that Carnival gives me. And Maggie said, they get where you're coming from without you having to say anything. So in those moments, when I am praising and exalting that experience on the road, there are other people who will see me. And a similar energy or similar spirit will overtake them as well, because they see it and they're like, I know exactly how you feel. Without, even if you can't put it into words, they see when they're like, I feel that too. It's not something that you see outside of how it's outwardly expressed by the people experiencing it. It's not something that I could take to an interview and be like, this is it. It's a feeling. It's like electricity. All right. And so those were like the storytelling interview excerpts for you all to sit with, and they're situated in themes of queerness, sexuality, cultural pride, cultural heritage, identity, and thinking about community health, social connection, mental health and well-being, the physicality, the physical health elements of it. And so with that, we are at our discussion section of the presentation. And so I touched on some of the themes that you all have shared when you registered for this presentation today. And these are some additional questions that were posed that I will talk about a little bit, and then we can just open it up for like more general discussion and Q&A. So someone asked, what opportunities does Carnival provide for people who might not fit within the conventional gender binary? And both like in my personal experience and through being able to talk with other masqueraders, so other people who participate in Carnival, it really seems as though while it differs from country to country around the Caribbean region, that their opportunities are increasing because more people are being more intentional about representation, about inclusion in Carnival, and you're more able to like visibly see folks who present as fitting not within the gender binary. And so I think especially you heard an excerpt from someone in St. Lucia who said the band that they were in, they didn't even know, but like all their friends, all their queer friends were in it, and the band was like really supportive of it. In Trinidad and Tobago, there are certain bands that are well known for being welcoming of folks who don't fit within, the conventional gender binary, to use those words. Lost Tribe is one of them. Yuma is often known to be a band that is super inclusive. And so opportunities are there, they're growing. And I think over the years, as a lot more advocacy efforts continue and bands, especially now because of COVID-19, are really trying to get creative with the costumes and the representation and the storytelling aspects of it, that we'll see more opportunities. I'm looking at all right, there we go. So nothing yet in the chat box. Next question is around, in what ways have you seen participants queer the celebration? And I think this is a really important question and speaks to the notion of queering as a verb. And I know that there are critiques around queer theory, big Q, big T, really like directly and indirectly encouraging people to feel like they can queer everything as long as it's not part of the norm, without centering the fact that like it's an identity, or there are identities and expressions and existences that have been contextualized in their oppression, and they're like fighting against that oppression. And so I wanted to mention that and think about how participants are queering the celebration by being adamant about their inclusion, by being adamant about some of even like the costumes. Most carnival bands have female and male costumes. They have two options. Within those options, they might change, like, oh, you can have a high panty waist, or you can have a thong, or you can have a t-shirt, or whatever it is. And there have been folks who will either demand to say, no, I don't want this that you're assigning to me, I want this other one, or they'll take the costume and recreate it, use different elements, remix it to make their own. And also people have been creating new bands, new forms of celebration outside of the mainstream carnival celebrations that specifically center queerness, and center it again in this context of celebrating Black euphoria, celebrating Black joy, emancipation, liberation, and Blackness across all types of categories and all expressions. Like, you can't leave out specific groups in that celebration of Blackness. So I've also seen those different types of queering celebration as well. And then this last question that someone brought up: why is it important for joy and celebration to be within the realm of public health? And so I think it's super important, and I'll reiterate again, like, one of my biggest frustrations with the field of public health, and I've been in public health, what year is it, 2021? Maybe for like 11 years officially. But again, it's always this like, these communities are damaged, or like Black people, they have diabetes and they have high blood pressure because them eat too much pork meat and they eat too much rice and peas and too much starch, and just all this like kind of demonizing and degradation of people's cultural traditions and practices, and acting as though they're genetically predisposed without contextualizing systems of oppression, without contextualizing colonization and harm and lack of access, and just all these different concepts, right? And so for me, being able to include joy and celebration, that kind of really helps us to focus on, okay, there are so many different elements to life. There are so many reasons why we do the things that we do that aren't just about good health, right? There's complexity in the decisions we make. So if I'm eating a meal, or if I'm participating in carnival and maybe like I have an injury, but I need to participate in carnival because it means so much to me, and I may not pay attention to my injury. I may eat the food because it makes me feel good. It releases endorphins and serotonin and all that in my brain, even if it's not considered helpful by public health, right? People have reasons for doing the things that they do. And oftentimes those reasons are connected to joy, connected to celebration. And so it really gets at the heart of what desire-based frameworks really talks about, where it's what are people's hopes and desires for themselves and for their communities, and being able to allow for that complexity, that nuance. I don't think public health does a really good job at that. I think, I did some of the literature I read some of it on assets-based, strengths-based frameworks, positive health. And of course, those are also still very limited because they're contextualized in this very like Euro-American way of viewing health in the world. And so that's like a quick snapshot. I can go into some of that a little bit later, touching on the question about how this has been received by the Academy. So I think I actually have been able to, should I say, get away with some stuff. So I'm in the Doctor of Public Health program, which is a program that is different from the PhD in public health, where Doctor of Public Health focuses on translating research into action, whereas PhDs really focus on the research component. And so for us, we focus on leadership, innovation, communication, and I think because of that flexibility in the program, I'm able to take a much more flexible and autonomous approach to how I perceive and think of public health. And so my program specifically has been really receptive. When I first told my program director, like, hey, I kind of had this idea, but it's a little funky and it doesn't really align with what we've been taught in this program, but this is how I'm now thinking about my approach. So they were very, very receptive. But I do think, like, because we're not a research program, that we're like kind of not part of what you would consider the academy. Although like some of my research and my methods have followed some of those routes as well. But overall, well received. All right, so those are the questions that Michael gave me that y'all gave him for us to discuss. If there are any additional questions, you can put them in the chat box or the Q&A. But yeah, we can like get into discussion for the next 10 minutes or so. And this is just my thank you slide. So y'all have my contact information. And yeah.
Thank you so much. This has been so beautiful. My heart is so full, and I love this research so much and the work that you do. Definitely labors of love. So this is wonderful. I appreciate you taking time to chat with us and answering those questions as well. And one thing I'm wondering, kind of backtracking a little, folks feel free to add something in the chat if you have a question. But in the meantime, that flyer that we made with that photo is just beautiful. Like my sister's like a graphic designer, and when I asked for help on that flyer, she was like, oh my God, like this is so beautiful. Is there like a story behind that photo or that experience, or like, okay.
Okay. Ooh, I should have put a photo in the presentation. But anyway, okay. So yes. So that costume, first of all, like, so I told you I went to Carnival last year, February 2020. Clearly, that was in the middle of the school year. In most Caribbean carnivals, costumes, we have like band launch season, which tends to happen during the summer. So summer 2019, I was, doing my internship, seeing on my feed, all my friends are talking about, ooh, Lost Tribe, Carnival, like all the carnival costumes are dropping. So I'm like, I'm not gonna go to Carnival, but let me just watch this presentation. And then Lost Tribe had their presentation of Anansi. So that's the theme for last year's presentation. And Anansi is a spider, a trickster spider from West African folklore. And I grew up reading these stories about Anansi the spider, one of my favorite characters, where he's just very cunning, a little wicked sometimes because he tricks his friends. But the lessons that you learn from Anansi and his friends are about life, love, community, belonging, helping each other. And like when I heard that was the theme, and then I saw the carnival costume. And so Lost Tribe is also considered to be an innovative costume band because they're moving away from like using feathers, which tend to be an unsustainable practice, especially because many carnival costumes use ostrich feathers. And so I already love them because they use a lot of different materials to move away from like the more traditional ways of making carnival costumes. But seeing the Anansi costume with the metal, I don't even know, like the legs, and I had like the umbrella, which in one of the stories, Anansi, is in trees, so it's like an umbrella tree. You see the patterns on the costume that harken back to some of the like different West African cultural prints. And so that's pretty much the story of just like the Carnival Band, as many Carnival bands in the Caribbean do, they have an overarching theme. And so my costume was Anansi the spider. There was also a costume for the elephant, Anansi's friend the elephant, costumes for bumblebees, chameleons, a lion. And so let me go back because this is, you'll see in these photos. But anyway, that's all I have to say. Like the presentation was Anansi the spider and his friends, and really harkening back to the West African storytelling traditions. There we go. So you will see, this is the elephant, Aaron the elephant. I don't remember all their names, but the elephant, this one is the chameleon. This is another elephant costume. There are like different, this is the firefly, right? I forget which one this is. But anyway, that's all. I can gush for like forever. So yeah.
Thank you. That's so exciting. And I'm glad that you shared that with us. And I guess one other thing that's on my mind, oh, actually, somebody just posted something. What are, so somebody asked in the chat, like, what are some of the actions you intend to take around promoting joy through systemic public health approaches? Are there some collaborations you have in mind or have already started?
All right, hold on. I am trying to open up the Q&A, but it's not opening up. All right, I'm gonna take off my screen real quick. There we go. All right. Sorry, it's easier for me sometimes to like read while the question's being read out loud.
Yeah.
All right, so what are some of the actions you intend to take around promoting joy through systematic public health approaches? Are there some collaborations you have in mind or have already started? Thank you, that's a really, really great question. I think, so most of my work in public health has been in sexual and reproductive health, rights and justice, in sexual violence prevention and counseling. And so, especially within those realms, being able to center people's hopes and desires like for themselves. So when we're thinking about public health programs and public health initiatives, oftentimes, again, using the example of sexual reproductive health, we look at sex and reproduction and any affiliated topics from this, like, let's prevent all these bad things from happening. And so a lot more folks have been taking not just like sex positive approaches, for example, but like sex critical approaches where we're able to hold that complexity and nuance, where you recognize that there are some folks who maybe they're asexual and they don't experience sexual attraction, but they still have sexual health, they still have reproductive health to be taken into consideration. And just by having that framing first and foremost, that then directs the types of programs that you then implement that are not just focused on how can we prevent disease? How can we prevent disease? How can we prevent disease? Because people are engaging in all types of health behaviors, not to stay healthy, but because they provide different benefits for them. And so I think my framing around that, being in this field, it aligns with some of the approaches that are developing. And even now, like at school, I've talked to some folks about, okay, I took Dr. Elami's course at at Hugsy, in mass story inquiry. Is there a way we can have this incorporated into more public health courses, and or at least have it like as a requirement for us to, you know, take Dr. Elami's course? But don't tell her I said that. She's on my committee, so she already knows. But there's been more incorporation of like desire-based frameworks and really thinking about joy and pleasure as part of the whole story, rather than just looking at, we're thinking about health on a community level, or we're trying to protect people, which is very parentalistic, and moving away from the parentalism in public health. So I think it's all about like the framing, because once you have that framing, then how you decide, okay, well, we're going to choose a program that really centers community stories about themselves, rather than like, what's our story based on the data that already exists, that you know, this community is just plagued by diabetes or Zika or whatever it is. They're not following the protocol, all of that. right? So let's see. So are there any collaborations I have in mind or have already started? So I, because I have a lot of interests and they kind of like, they don't always fit in the realm of public health. I'm actually working on a collaboration with Carnival, which hopefully will happen, like be executed later this summer, where we're taking this joyful approach, but also thinking about like our hopes and desires as Caribbean people for Carnival to come back, whenever back is, fully, but for it to be more inclusive of queer folks, of have increased accessibility for disabled folks, have to be more sustainable, where we're not only thinking about ourselves as consumers, but also thinking about our relation to the land and the environment and the repercussions that Carnival participation has in that regard. And so because we're couching all this in like, okay, Carnival means so much to us. It's a spiritual practice. It's an emotional release. It, like, because we don't have it right now, people's mental health has been really affected because it's like the one outlet that so many people have allowed for themselves. So thinking about all of that, like how can we work towards making this cultural practice that also provides health benefits even better? That's one collaboration that I'm working on. And I'm hoping to have more collaborations that incorporate public health, but are not from a public health lens, especially because traditional public health tends to be very parentalistic. I'm not parentalistic. I don't follow those approaches. And it often tends to be very like capitalist and anti-capitalist through and through. So public health approaches can be incorporated into the collaborations, but they're never going to be like the driving force because of traditional public health approaches, although at the school and in other places, they're trying to be more intentional about moving away from the more harmful origins and practices of public health. Yeah.
Great. Well, appreciate this. Looks like so many people are so excited. A lot of love from you during these answers in this presentation. And yeah, we're going to definitely be sharing this online. So if you'd like to revisit Dr. Powerful's messages and words, we'll have the recording online soon and we'll share that out with you all. And their contact info as well. So when we do a follow-up email, we'll have the email in there as well. So that if you'd like to collaborate, you know, speaking on that conversation just now, you know, that option is out there as well. But thank you so much, Sherine. Thank you so much to everybody who attended. We appreciate you all, and we're so glad that we have this wonderful gathering. And you're getting so much love in the chat.
Thanks, y'all. And thank you, Michael. This was fun. I'm glad I got to touch on some of those topics as well. There's so much, of course, I could talk forever about it, but of course, anyone who's still on the call who wants to talk with me more, I did write down one person's name, so thank you for letting me know you want to connect, but feel free to connect with me via email, because there's just so much more that I want to share with everybody. So, yeah.
Wonderful. Alrighty, y'all. Well, thank you so much. Appreciate you all, and we will follow up very soon. One more, you know, round of applause for Dr. Powerful. Stay tuned.
Thanks, Michael. All right, take care, everyone.